At a funeral for a beloved community figure, an elderly woman steps up to speak, only to reveal a secret about the deceased that no one saw coming. What starts as a tribute quickly turns into a shocking confession that leaves everyone questioning everything they thought they knew. The church was filled with the soft murmur of mourners, a low hum of whispered conversations, as the scent of lilies and roses filled the air. The pews were packed with family, friends, and community members, each person holding their own memories of the dearly departed. The man who had passed away had been a pillar in the community, known for his generosity, his quiet strength, and his unwavering faith. His loss was felt deeply, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The atmosphere was heavy with grief. Every corner of the church seemed to hold a piece of the past, each photo on display telling a story of a life well lived. The younger generation fidgeted nervously in their seats, their expressions a mix of sadness and confusion. Many didn't know the full extent of the man's life outside of what they had seen: a successful businessman, a devoted father, and a respected elder in the community. But there were whispers, rumors of a past unknown and of connections forgotten by time. At the back of the church, in the shadow of the mourners, sat an elderly woman, her skin a rich shade of brown, her hair silver and neatly pulled back into a bun. She was dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, her hands folded in her lap. She had a quiet dignity about her, an air of grace that made her presence undeniable, even though no one had expected her to be there. The younger generation didn't recognize her, and many of the older members could barely remember her name. Yet there was something familiar about her, a connection to the deceased perhaps, that no one had ever truly understood. As the funeral service continued, the murmurs among the mourners grew louder. There were subtle glances cast in the direction of the elderly woman at the back of the church, some people craning their necks to catch a glimpse of her. Whispers filled the air, soft and uncertain, but heavy with curiosity. "Who is she?" one person asked quietly. "I don't recognize her," another replied. "But I think she knew him, didn't she?" The whispers were filled with questions that no one had answers to. Some attendees speculated that she was a distant relative, perhaps a cousin or aunt, though none of the family seemed to claim her. Others whispered that she had been an old friend, someone who had known the deceased long before he became the figure everyone knew. But the most intriguing possibility, one that lingered just beneath the surface, was that she might have been involved with him in a way no one had ever guessed. "She's too calm, too composed," one woman whispered. "Could she have been more than just a friend? Something tells me there's a story there." No one could quite put their finger on it, but the tension in the air grew palpable as the service carried on. The woman had sat quietly through the eulogies, her face inscrutable, her eyes lowered as if she were reflecting on something far deeper than grief. And then, in a quiet but firm voice, the pastor announced, "We now invite Miss Clara Williams to share a few words." The room fell silent, the air heavy with expectation. This was a name no one had heard in years, and no one expected her to speak. All eyes turned to her as she slowly rose from her seat, her every movement deliberate, her presence commanding despite the uncertainty surrounding her. As she made her way to the podium, the crowd waited, their breath collectively held. Clara Williams stood at the podium, her hands gripping the edges, her eyes momentarily closing as if to gather strength. The room was utterly still, the weight of the moment pressing on everyone. She took a deep breath, and then her voice, soft but steady, filled the air. "Thank you for allowing me this moment," Clara began, her tone gentle, almost reverent. "I knew James for many years. We were friends in the truest sense of the word." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the congregation, her expression a mix of nostalgia and sorrow. "There were times when we laughed together, shared stories, and simply sat in silence, understanding one another in a way that words never quite could." The crowd hung on every word, some nodding in agreement, others wiping their tears. But beneath her calm demeanor, an undercurrent of tension stirred. There was something about the way she spoke, a kind of bittersweet finality that made everyone wonder if there was more to her connection with James than she was letting on. Clara continued, her voice softening. "But life, as it does, brings its struggles, joys and sorrows, highs and lows, And through all of that, James was always there, a quiet presence, a guiding light. I will always cherish the moments we shared, the things he taught me. And then, as if the words had suddenly been freed from her soul, Clara's voice wavered for the first time. But there is something I've carried with me for far too long, a truth I've kept hidden. The room fell even quieter. People leaned in, unsure of what was coming. Clara took another breath. James wasn't just a friend of mine. We were something more, much more. She paused, her eyes now scanning the faces before her. We shared a love, one that none of you knew about. A love that was never meant to see the light of day. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the air seemed to freeze. Clara had just revealed a secret that none of them could have anticipated. The revelation hung in the air, its weight settling heavily on everyone present. The room was plunged into stunned silence, the weight of Clara's revelation hanging like a storm cloud over the mourners. Gasps echoed through the church, and eyes widened in disbelief. A low murmur spread quickly, rippling through the crowd as the magnitude of what she had just revealed began to sink in. Some people exchanged shocked glances, mouths agape, unsure of how to process the information. Others turned to each other in whispered disbelief, shaking their heads, as if trying to convince themselves that they had heard wrong. A few of the family members, seated near the front, shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Faces flushed with a mix of confusion and anger. James' children, particularly, looked stricken. One of them, a daughter, clutched her hand to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. "How could he?" she murmured, barely audible. The questions that followed were sharp and accusing. Why didn't we know about this? Who is she to speak for him? Some of the older relatives muttered under their breath, skeptical about the woman's words. She must be mistaken, or worse, lying, one cousin grumbled. There's no way they were that close. But Clara, undeterred by the growing unrest in the room, held her ground. Her voice, though steady, carried a quiet authority as she continued to speak. "I know this is difficult to understand," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "But this secret, this love, wasn't just something James and I shared. It was something that changed the course of our lives, and it affected others in ways that none of you knew." Her voice grew softer, but there was a finality in it now, an unmistakable sense of closure. "I never wanted to hurt anyone with this truth," she said, her gaze locking with those around her. "But I've carried it long enough. It's time for the past to be known, for the silence to end. It's time for us all to face the truth, whatever it may mean for each of us." The tension in the room shifted. Some stared at her, struck by the weight of her words, while others fidgeted uncomfortably, unsure of what to make of the painful revelation. The truth, once buried, had emerged, unrelenting and impossible to ignore. The atmosphere in the church shifted dramatically after Clara's revelation. The funeral, which had once been a quiet tribute to a beloved figure, now felt heavy with unresolved emotions. The air was thick with whispers, and the room seemed to pulse with an uneasy energy. For some, the truth had shattered their image of the man they thought they knew. The idea that James, a man so revered in the community, had kept such a powerful secret was a bitter pill to swallow. They felt betrayed, not just by his actions, but by the years of silence, the years of unspoken truths. How could he have kept this hidden from them all? Others, however, found something oddly freeing in Clara's words. The secrecy, the shadows, had always weighed heavily on them, even if they hadn't known what the secret was. Now it seemed, the truth had finally set things in motion. For some of the older relatives, particularly those who had known James long before his success, Clara's revelation offered a sense of relief, an unburdening of long-held suspicions. They could finally make sense of things, of the unspoken tension that had always simmered just beneath the surface. The truth, no matter how painful, had a certain clarity to it. As for Clara, she quietly stepped back into the background after finishing her speech. Her role was complete, her purpose fulfilled. She did not linger in the spotlight, but instead allowed the crowd to digest what had just been unveiled. A few of the braver mourners approached her, hesitant at first, seeking answers to the questions her revelation had raised. Others, however, avoided her gaze altogether, still too stunned by the weight of her words. The ripple effect of Clara's truth was undeniable. and it was clear that this moment would live on in the minds of everyone present, forever altering the way they viewed the deceased and each other. As the ceremony drew to a close, the mood in the church had shifted dramatically. The somber notes of the organ that had once signaled a traditional farewell now felt almost discordant, out of place amidst the uncertainty and shifting emotions. Some of the mourners, though still shaken, found a strange sense of comfort in the truth. The secret, now laid bare, allowed them to let go of their own doubts and questions. They could no longer mourn the man they had thought they knew, but instead they began to mourn the complexity of who he truly was, a man full of contradictions, hidden passions, and untold stories. For others, the revelation was a wound that would not heal easily. The unanswered questions hung in the air, thick with unspoken anger and confusion. How could they have missed the signs? How could they have been so blind to the truth? The secrets Clara had revealed forced them to reconsider their entire relationship with the deceased, leaving them unsure of what, if anything, had been genuine. The sense of betrayal lingered in their hearts, and though the ceremony ended, the unresolved emotions would not dissipate so easily. As Clara quietly left the church, her role fulfilled, the community she had once been a part of was irrevocably changed. No longer the quiet observer, she had become the bearer of a truth that had shaken them to their core. Her words echoed in their hearts long after she had disappeared into the evening, leaving behind a group of people who would never look at their past or the man they had mourned. In the same way again, the secret had reshaped everything. The truth once hidden had altered their reality forever.